Hi, I'm Michael, and this is Edited Memory. With the upcoming release of Godzilla vs. Kong, I made the rather bizarre choice to watch all of the Godzilla and King Kong movies I could before its release, including several of the spin-offs and similar titles. Upon finishing the list, it included 50 movies, including the 32 Japanese Godzilla movies, 3 American Godzilla movies, 11 King Kong movies, the third of which is also the third Japanese Godzilla movie, and 5 other movies. Upon reaching the third movie in my viewing, I came up with a question. Is the American remake of Godzilla from 1998 a remake of the Japanese classic, or the film which inspired Godzilla in the first place? In the 1950s, a classic monster movie came out that changed film forever. Atomic weapons wake up a giant monster that has been asleep for eons. The monster makes its way across the ocean toward the mainland, destroying several fishing boats along the way. A scientist is the first to bring attention to the threat posed, but the public at large remains ignorant at first. Eventually, a first encounter proves that humanity is unprepared, and a general panic ensues. Military forces then create an electrified barrier that proves ineffective against the monster. It's only after the monster attacks a large city that the solution is found. When all conventional means prove unable to kill the monster, a scientist uses an experimental weapon to finally put it to rest. If you're familiar with the movie, this may sound like I'm describing the story of Godzilla. This exact same description, however, can also be used to describe The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, an American film released 16 months before Godzilla. Rather than a man in a suit, the monster was created using the effects of the great Ray Harryhausen, who also did the effects for The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, and Clash of the Titans. And the plot is very loosely based on the short story from Ray Bradbury, the author of Fahrenheit 451 and The Martian Chronicles. The film has cameos in films such as Gremlins 2 and Cloverfield. The Beast, as I'll call it from here on out, is a representation of American fears of nuclear weapons. In World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor was generally considered to be the awakening of a sleeping giant of the U.S. The war, of course, ended with the USA dropping nuclear weapons on Japan. It stands to reason that many in the U.S. would begin wondering what kind of sleeping giants our own nuclear program would awaken. The film depicts a manifestation of those fears. Our own atomic weapons come back to haunt us by awakening a terrible foe. Following the destruction of the cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the hands of the American nuclear program, Japan was in a state that no country had ever experienced before. At least in theory, America could wipe the island nation off the face of the map with minimal losses. In the case of America, no other country had ever had that power, and in the case of Japan, no country had ever faced that level of hopelessness. When the U.S. conducted the Castle Bravo nuclear tests in the Bikini Atoll in 1954, a Japanese shipping vessel known in English as the Lucky Dragon 5 became irradiated, and their national fear of nuclear weapons was renewed. Having recently seen The Beast, as well as a re-release of King Kong, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka began writing a script called The Giant Monster from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Apparent misunderstandings about fathoms being a measure of depth and leagues being a measure of distance aside, the film would later be renamed to Project G for brevity, and then eventually released under the name Gojira, which would then later be renamed Godzilla for American audiences, which Godzilla 1998 would lampoon in a very awkward manner.
And it's Gojira, you moron!
As with The Beast, the movie functions as an allegory for nuclear weapons, but where the Beast functioned essentially as a fear of something coming back to bite us in the ass, Godzilla instead focuses on the aftermath of the attack. Notable scenes include shots of scientists inside impact craters left behind by Godzilla's footprints, as well as the destruction of Tokyo following Godzilla's main attack. The film was not very well received originally, but still spawned a sequel that came out 6 months later, which was not uncommon for the time. The original 1933 version of King Kong also had a sequel that came out 9 months after its own release. The series then took a 7-year hiatus, during which time American audiences fell in love with the original Godzilla. During this time, Toho made other giant monster films, now known as kaiju, such as Rodan and Mothra. When it was finally decided to bring Godzilla back, they did so alongside King Kong, and the next dozen movies would become less focused on making a statement about nuclear warfare and more focused on becoming kid-friendly. There was an attempt to remake Godzilla in America for well over a decade before Roland Emmerich finally made his attempt in 1998. When describing the film, Emmerich made the statement, "We took part of the original movie's basic storyline, in that the creature becomes created by radiation and it becomes a big challenge, but that's all we took." If you're not already familiar with the film, that should tell you everything you need to know about it. Emmerich is best known for his disaster films, such as Independence Day, The Day After Tomorrow, and 2012. None are exactly deep and thoughtful films, and Godzilla 98 was no exception. This version of Godzilla was implied to be an iguana that was mutated by a nuclear test in French Polynesia by the French military. As you find out in the film, the giant iguana made its way from French Polynesia across Panama and Jamaica before heading north all the way to New York City in order to lay eggs. Logic be damned, because the only point to a Roland Emmerich movie is destruction. There's no subtext here, no dramatic insight to the pain of a nation or fears of consequences. This is straight disaster porn where the people at fault are the French, so we don't have to worry about our own culpability. The film even includes a dig at famed critics Siskel and Ebert because they gave negative reviews of Emmerich's previous films, Stargate and Independence Day. Godzilla 98 was pretty much universally reviled. It sits at a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes with a 28% audience score, one of the few films where audiences and critics seem to be generally aligned. Today, the only reason anybody mentions the movie is as a joke, an example of a Hollywood system taking a foreign cultural icon and reusing it without understanding what made it popular in the first place. The Japanese studio responsible for creating Godzilla, Toho, would later go on to include the American Godzilla, now dubbed Zilla, in Godzilla Final Wars, by having him go up against their own Godzilla. While many point to this as Toho insulting the American film, it's also worth noting that Godzilla kills pretty much every other kaiju that has ever appeared in a Godzilla film in pretty quick fashion. That film is a glorious mess that throws everything it can at the viewer. Though I'm pretty sure that neither Roland Emmerich or the writer of the film, Dean Devlin, realized it, Godzilla 98 seems to be less of a remake of the Japanese Godzilla and more of a remake of the film which inspired it in the first place, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. All three share certain markers, of course. A creature woken by atomic weapons makes its way through the ocean to attack a major city, attacking fishing boats along the way. However, there are certain particular items that put it more in line with the Beast. Yes, I'm aware these are largely going to be coincidental, but it's still an interesting idea that they accidentally remade the Beast, rather than Godzilla. To start off with, we have to state the obvious and point out that the Beast and Godzilla 98, the monster ends up in New York City. It's Emmerich, so he wanted to blow up some landmarks and set it in the US, and he also wanted the monster to have somewhere to hide, so New York City is a logical choice. The Beast also takes place in New York City, though there's a significantly lower focus on landmarks. The only landmarks that are seen are Coney Island, the New York Stock Exchange, and the Brooklyn Bridge can be seen in the background when the Beast makes land. The attack on New York City in both starts on the docks. In the Beast, we see normal day-to-day operations of the workers as the monster appears and disrupts everything. In Godzilla 98, we also see the same day-to-day operations, but then it also throws in an old man going down on a pier to go fishing, who then subsequently catches Godzilla. Incidentally, the movie never confirms that the old man survived. Not really relevant to our discussion, but it kind of feels like they left a scene of him surviving on the cutting room floor. At one point in The Beast, the monster is confronted by an armed force of police officers. They begin shooting at him, and he makes his escape by going through a building. In Godzilla 98, it is implied the exact same scene happens when we see a giant hole in the building. It then plays out in reverse, with Godzilla coming through a building in order to attack the helicopters that were already chasing him. In both films, the monster makes a point to randomly disappear after its first attack in New York. The Beast just kind of glosses this over, while Godzilla 98 points out the absurdity of the idea that it disappeared. An editor's note here, pointing out that your idea is absurd doesn't mean it's acceptable. An ambush is set up where the Beast appears at night. The ambush fails spectacularly, while the monster gets away, leaving a blood trail behind. While Godzilla 98 gives us more information about the ambush, the end result is the same. Godzilla gets away, leaving puddles of blood behind. Godzilla in the 1954 film is nearly invulnerable. We see him be attacked, but at no point does it seem like he's actually injured, except by a superweapon at the end. Both the Beast and Godzilla 98 are fully capable of being injured by normal weapons. The Beast is wounded by an RPG to the throat, and Godzilla 98 is ultimately killed by missiles fired from a jet. At one point, Godzilla 98 is knocked unconscious after being struck by 2 torpedoes fired in New York Harbor. The Beast, in an off-screen moment, is presumed dead by mines in the harbor. Both are presumed dead as a result. The Beast, after being presumed dead, shows up again, this time on Coney Island, a popular tourist attraction, and ultimately dies while tangled up in a roller coaster. Godzilla 98 ultimately reappears, showing up at a tourist attraction, Madison Square Gardens. He then chases the leads through the city before getting tangled up in another tourist attraction, the Brooklyn Bridge. One final point here on which I'll be brief. Godzilla 98 straight up rips off Jurassic Park. Anybody that's seen it knows what I'm talking about. I feel like it was part of the mainstream discussion at the time, but it bears repeating. In the final act, when the Godzilla eggs start hatching, is almost entirely stolen from Jurassic Park. The baby Godzillas behave exactly like the raptors, and there are numerous shots that are ripped directly from that movie. Even when Godzilla re-emerges, it includes a shot of him chasing them that is so similar, I was expecting to see the words, "Object and mirror are closer than they appear," written on the bottom of the frame. And what we are left with is a soulless mess that has no reason to exist. Take what we've talked about, a licensed product the director had no interest in, an accidental remake of the movie that inspired that movie, throw in a generic love interest who has big city dreams, as well as a government cover-up of the origins of the disaster, and you've got yourself a movie that barely made its production budget back in the domestic box office. The question I asked at the start of this video was, is Godzilla 1998 a remake of the original Godzilla, or a stealth remake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the film that inspired Godzilla? In case you couldn't already tell, the answer to that question is a very loud and clear neither. When I was watching The Beast, it really struck me how similar they were, and the idea of Godzilla 98 being a stealth remake of The Beast was very exciting. But by the time I actually got around to watching Godzilla 1998, I realized that the movie itself isn't self-aware enough to be anything more than what it appears to be. Disaster porn full of boring Hollywood tropes. The takeaway from this is that movies borrow from each other all the time, whether intentionally or not. The original Godzilla borrowed heavily from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which in turn borrowed heavily from King Kong, which had come out 20 years before. King Kong wasn't the progenitor either. Prior to that, there was The Lost World in 1925, which was based on a 1912 book by Arthur Conan Doyle, which was in turn inspired by Jules Verne's 1864 novel, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I could probably trace this idea of giant creatures attacking modern man back further than that, but I feel like 150 years is far enough. In the end, we shouldn't worry so much about what ripped off what or inspired what. We should care about the quality of the art itself. The original Godzilla and its inspirations have led to the creation of a number of great movies and other works, and just like Godzilla, they deserve to be judged on their own qualities. Hey everybody, thanks again for tuning in. Unlike my past videos, I clearly used a lot more still pictures here. Editing actual video has resulted in a lot of wasted time, and I feel like the still photos still get my point across pretty well, and could be done easily from my laptop. So unless there's a dramatic reduction in quality of my videos overall, I think I'll be leaning into that more. But let me know what you think. Go ahead and comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe. I will have plenty more videos coming in the months ahead. Thanks for watching. I'm Michael, and this was Edited Memory.